Hey there, that's Friday morning. This is sort of a follow-up to my last video when I talked about the girl on the planet and technology, right? And in a previous video, I realized that I covered a lot about what has value, the value of the technology. How do I put it? Knowing the results of whenever we use our energy, our living energies, in spirit, if you will, and our state of consciousness, what it is that we've learned, wherever we happen to be at any one given moment of time, how we use our energy. And how we use our energy at any one given moment of time can be measured. And we can measure the impact of that. I know that because I experienced that. We all do. Okay, so some of this is basic logic and what we used to call common sense. So one of the things that I thought of has to do, there's always going to be some data point that I didn't cover, because you realize that the cosmos, when you think of infinite light, infinite creative imagination, and if you want to use the term, the English term data, what is data? Information. So we experience the information. So we learn the value of the information, the value of the data. So how are we using the data that we experience? By a measurement of the bandwidth channel that it represents, which represents what we experience, which is perception. So I realized early on that the art of communication truly is an art form. And we can even measure it in terms of how many bits and bytes of data, or bits and bytes of energy, or bits and bytes of information, using a mathematical formula in which to convey what those bits and bytes mean, and how we measure that as value, energy value. Like money equals energy, energy equals money, or no money and just energy, free energy, manifestation in a bidirectional mirror, right? Echo chamber. So I thought to myself, coherence. What is coherent? The coherence of the communication, or the waves in harmony with each other, or the waves. When we're in a boat, we're out on the waves. Wow, man, those waves feel good. Man, I love that harmony. Man, am I in a state of peace, right? I believe we've all experienced that, right? So one of the things that I thought after I did that last video, I felt that I didn't convey it in a way in which, and again, this is always goes back to perception, because we realize that everybody's experiences, right, are sort of different from each other. Not that we can't experience the same thing. You can stand next to a drill press, pull down the handle. I go to the drill press, I pull down the handle. We both experience what it was like to pull the handle down, right? Hey, I just experienced pulling the handle down. Or I experienced driving a car, riding a bicycle, or whatever it might be, okay? And then you get into perception bias, where, remember, if you have, I mentioned this once before, about 10 people standing at a street corner, okay? And this is really interesting behavioral psychology when you really begin to examine the underlying causality of this with unconscious memory and conscious creative imagination, where you can have 10 people that are looking at the same exact thing, okay? And you can get 10 completely different descriptions of what they experienced when they perceived through the visible light spectrum what they saw. How do we explain that? Perception vibration. The bandwidth channel of the frequencies that we're using to experience who we are in relation to everything else that is. Why is that important? Because the other day I had an experience, for example, and this is always what I call full circle. This is like being in eternity and then venturing out into the cosmos to go experience everything that is out there to experience. Because learning, when you are excited to learn something new that you've never learned before, never experienced before, I can't speak, obviously, for anybody else, but that is an exciting process. to go into the unknown. Because when you go into the unknown without any fear whatsoever, because you are experiencing what you are, which is what love is, when you're going to do that, then you know that you're an eternal, living, energy, spiritual being that is venturing out into the cosmos, and just knowing that knows that you're bringing energy that you are attracting that allows you to go faster, and you are bringing the light in wherever you go. That's an exciting process. My father used to say to me, put some light on the subject, which is the same thing as to say, expose it. Let's talk about the subject matter. What value does it have, right? So I thought when it comes to perception, the experience I had the other day was when it's like I'm not the physical body and I wasn't experiencing the physical body. I was experiencing the perception that I was having with the perception of the girl on the planet that is using her perception and her energy that provides the energy from which the hologram, everything that is in nature, you're perceiving it at the same level that she is, which is providing the energy in which the biosphere is operating, which means you become one. The higher state of consciousness that you have, you realize that you're doing the same thing that she is. Okay? Which means the perception to which you realize that the energy that you're using to be who you are as perception is the energy that is providing the energy that is sustaining the trees, sustaining the grass, sustaining everything that is in nature, in living spirit. You are just as much a part of the living energies that represent the perception, which is the same perception which is what she is in living spirit, what she does. Okay? So that's why when I think about, and I've said this before, when you hurt her, you hurt me because I experience it. I experience it within me. So I thought to myself, for example, when you surveil her, okay, then you're surveilling me because I'm in her. I'm experiencing her. The perception is the same, okay? So therefore, when you are surveilling me, you're surveilling her, and they're surveilling everybody that is here. Why do they need to do that? What is it that drives the being to use their energy that believe that they have? What is it, the underlying motivation to want to surveil anything instead of experiencing conscious, creative imagination? Because when they use those eyes, their satellites, they're actually recording something that's already happened. Because they don't run at the same speed she does. Okay? They don't run on the same bandwidth channel she does. Or they'd be in perception alignment with her state of consciousness. Okay? So it's sort of like this. What you do to her, you do to all of us. Because I am aware of what you do to her. Parasites in her, I feel in me. When your state of bandwidth channel perception of consciousness is with the perception of a goddess in a living biosphere, then we are aware of the energy we are using together to experience everything we are giving love to in nature. Okay? So perception is synchronized in motion. The energy that is in motion, which are her energies. Her state of consciousness. How she manages the peace, the harmony, and the balance within everything that is here in the biosphere. So the lens of experiencing the perception through our heart and soul, spirit, light body with her light body. When they surveil her, they are surveilling us within her. What I do to you, I do to me. What they do to her, they do to themselves. Why do they have a need to surveil everything? do they not implicitly trust the goddess in this biosphere to manage the health of living energies that have a spiritual relationship with each other? Now, for me, that's a question that humanity, all of us, should be asking ourselves. You think? As you probably realize, I ask a lot of questions because that's how we learn. That's why when I went through behavioral learning, I spent an enormous amount of time, and of course this is not a coincidence, right? Why I spent such an enormous amount of time looking at the behavioral relationships of everything that moves on the planet. Okay? And because it's always action, reaction, action, reaction. What is the underlying causation of all of the relationships of everything that is self-aware within this planet? What is the relationship that we all have with each other? And that includes everything that is alive and living in spirit and everything that moves. What is its function? What is it that gives us the greatest meaning, purpose, and value in our lives when we measure ourselves in coursework? Right? So I realized that because when I was a child, and obviously learned later on through just because we love to learn, we're trying to put together, for me, as I mentioned earlier, I couldn't figure out in the beginning, even though I acknowledge we're all on our own journey and free will is universal. Okay? So what that means, obviously, is that you're autonomous, I'm autonomous, because autonomy means that you are free to be who you are. How am I going to know who you really are if you're not free to be who you are? Okay? So that's why when I'm in nature, I can see everything that is in nature. They are all free to be who they are. Whether you're a bird, a bug, whatever it is that's out there. So when you're out there, just in the perception or the observation of everything that you're observing in an observation state, you're observing everything that's in a free state. You know, like the other day I was looking at bees that were pollinating flowers. I was communicating to the bees, hey little guy, what you doing? Sending love to the little bee. You know, and then I began to cry within my heart because I realized what they were doing to bees. Why would they want to do that to the bees? Flowers are the essence, the fragrance of flowers. Why would they ever want to do that to those little bees? Those bees didn't cause any harm to anybody. So this is why when I was a child, I was always measuring things on why people would do things that they're not aware of that destroys the very living biosphere that's providing them everything they need. I had to figure that out. It's like a self-termination switch, which is the inverted programming of going in reverse. So obviously, it's why I spent so much time measuring everything. Okay? The water cycle, the carbon cycle, all of the cycles. Okay? To try and measure the plus and the minus. You know, losing light, gaining light, losing light, gaining light, losing light, gaining light. You know? Because that's what it is. So when you perceive it through the lens of a classroom, it's easy to acknowledge you could almost expect that. So then you can measure the speed of the learning, which is known as the Backtune harmonics. How much time does it take to learn before you realize that the things that you're doing are actually causing your own contamination? Which means you're lowering your own energy. Why would we do that to ourselves? Because we're unaware. Our state of awareness just isn't that high enough to realize the impact of our own collective behavior, if you will, which is the sum of its parts. And the sum of its parts are not all the same because we're not a hive mind. But they would love to do that. Because the very idea that people could be autonomous and be self-rule beings, because nobody's worrying about what anybody else is doing, because nobody's doing any harm to anybody. Then you begin to realize that everything on the planet is thriving. Wow! Imagine that! So why aren't things thriving on this planet everywhere that you go? Right? I mean, we've all done that, and it doesn't matter what community you go through, you're experiencing all the different states of consciousness, which represents a bandwidth channel that everybody's on, experiencing who they are. So I know through Patty, for example, that threw up a pie chart, you begin to realize, oh my God, 2 out of 3 people on the planet are not Homo sapiens sapiens. Well, that explains a lot of it, okay? But how much intelligence does it take on whatever level you're operating at in states of consciousness to realize that we do things that obviously when you experience a result is not a pleasant result, right? We're not sadomasochistic. So until we, and that's one of the reasons why, I guess, is I've been watching this video called Indoctrination. This guy played basketball, Final Four, I guess, went into movie production, has a channel called Indoctrination. He was providing some interesting stuff, like Senator Ted Cruz came out, and now we're talking about the Senate, the U.S. Senate, demanding that Twitter, what's his name, Dorsey, account for the fact that they're trying to censor everything. So, you know, when you sort of put everything into the hopper, what I call the spin of the blender, right, then the speed in which people are becoming more aware of how their state of consciousness was being held captive to experience things that are going in the other way instead of thriving, we're going, you know, let's face it, we're dealing with fear and trust. Okay? How much do we implicitly trust who we are and the direction that we're going in? You know? So if you've been hammered over the head and ever since you came out of the womb, and actually before that, okay, where as a result of those experiences, because they know how to use symbols, language, neurolinguistic programming, if you will, okay. Noam Chomsky's one of the experts on that, but I don't expect to hear him come out and say it was all being used in which to program people to experience things in their own mind that cause them to lower their own energy without realizing how that works, where the spin of the data is going to be slower, which means they're going back instead of going forward in speed, which essentially means that it's like being in perpetual motion as a food source and an energy source by parasites that are feeding on our energy, and we're not realizing the undercausality of why that is, which essentially means we do it to ourselves. Okay, how's that possible? Because you have to learn how that neurolinguistic programming works with language, mathematics, symbols, energy, and the relationship that all those have with each other that represent what? Bandwidth, channel, vibration, perception, experiences from one moment to the next, or from one frame window to the next, which essentially means what are we perceiving and what is the energy we're using to perceive the cosmos that we perceive it with. So, for example, like when I'm on the Big Island and I'm as close as I can get to a living magma, wow! It's like being plugged into the biggest transformer in the cosmos, and your frequency and your perception just goes way up. See? That becomes an experience. That's a learning experience. Now that you've experienced that in relation to everything else you experience, then you begin to learn how the energies work, how living energies work in relationship to what we're learning, which relates to our perception. How we can perceive the cosmos that we're experiencing, that we live in as we go forward in our coursework, right? Because anything that is new that we experience is like learning from what value does that have, or what is the meaning and experience of what that represents. So if we're moving through the cosmos at a high rate of speed, without even being aware of it, because we're attracting the energy that represents what we are, then that means that everything that we're experiencing is exciting, adventurous, joyful, happy, because that's what the energy is. We're experiencing the energy which represents what that is, which is energy in motion. And so when we're all thriving on that kind of higher perception energy, then imagine what our electrical potential is. Then if we think of something together, we share that with each other because we collaborate. And when we're collaborating with each other instead of competing with each other, what happens? The power of our creative imagination becomes the sum of its parts in the advancement of our coursework to create and write a completely new reality that serves all of us. And that's where it's headed. Which is sort of like saying, we're done with you, right? So the rate of speed or the acceleration from which people had been plugged in, if you will, to, some will say, the mainstream media, or the reality in which they didn't believe that they had any way to change it because they can't perceive a reality that is any different than the one that they have grown accustomed to surviving in, can become a very scary challenge for them because they don't want to let go of something that was actually holding them captive. So the very idea that they could be autonomous and free and self-rule for a lot of people can be a very scary situation, because that would be no different than if you were able to measure that, say, as a teacher in a classroom, when a child realizes, hey, you're on your own. That child will go, wait a second, I need you. I haven't learned. I don't have the proper tools in which to learn how to be a self-sustaining unit, okay, of keeping my battery full where I have everything that I need. And that is one of the most beautiful experiences that I've ever had, is to sit on a beach in Lapahoehoe and realize that I have everything that I need, which means I don't need technology. I don't need anything in spirit to experience what I am in spirit, in knowing that I have everything that I need to feel happy, joyful, and peaceful. So you begin to realize it's not the material world that provides the happiness that you experience in living spirit. It is the energy. It is the energy that you're experiencing. That's why we give away so much energy. Okay? Is to go faster so we can experience the experience of knowing we have everything that we need, which means we have all the energy that we need. We don't need to feed on anybody else. Now we're Star Trekking. Star Trekking. That's a Star Trek navigator. The light, our high beams are fully lit. We can see the cosmos ahead of us. And that's what's so cool, because we realize that it's infinite. Those experiences go on infinitely, because that's infinite light, which is infinite love, which is infinite creative imagination. That's the perception through which my living spirit experiences the cosmos. And I'm always anchored with a goddess, because I thrive on her energies, which are the energies that represent what I am, because I experience those energies within me, just as I do being with her. So it's like being a reflection in the mirror of what she is in perception, of the same love that she gives that I